Okay, Dan, take it away.
Hello, my name is Dan Hennen. Today is June 28, 2020. We'll be reviewing on this podcast number 6 of the book, The Gray State, written by Greg Hernandez, Jr. Joining us today will be Catherine, Greg, and myself for this episode. How is everyone doing today?
Awesome.
Doing great.
Good. Well, we've got an interesting chapter to cover here. Greg's book is, for the new listeners out there, it's a 16-chapter book detailing the Crowley case murders. And this chapter today is called The Living Room. And because most of the details took place in the living room, this is going to be one heck of a chapter to cover. We may have to break this down into several parts, but we'll try it. We'll see how far we get here today. I'll start off by reading the first paragraph. Blood spatter in the living room was, quote, mostly on ground, according to BCA crime scene team lead Joe Cooksley. A black Springfield XD-40 handgun, which is item 1A, with a rubber Hogue grip sleeve, was found cocked on the living room floor, quote, several inches from David's left hand, according to Detective Tommy Booth. Detective Brian Bone was more specific, stating the gun was approximately 1 foot to the south of the left side of David's body. According to the firearm worksheet, some apparent blood-like substance was found in the barrel of the gun. The worksheet also mentioned apparent rust-like material, which could have been found on one of the 3 unspent cartridges in the gun. Now, the nice thing, if you're following along in Greg's book here, this is page 35 of the book. Once again, it's chapter 5 of the book. And Greg adds the sketch, the police drawing sketch, the handwritten sketch below in the book that shows the layout of the individuals and the bodies there. And remember, we have to keep in mind that the CAD or the drawing, the computer-aided drawing, number one, does not match what that was really at all. So that's another thing we could cover. But that's the first paragraph, Greg. You want to get us started on some of your questions and comments?
Yeah, I think...
Or Catherine. Let's start off with Greg.
Sure. I think, obviously, the biggest question is to make sure that this is where the crime actually happened. Now, I can't prove that it did or that it didn't, but this is where they say that the crime happened. And I think the most obvious reason why they say that, obviously, is because this is where the 3 bodies are found. This is where the gun is found. Everything seemed normal until a lot of people started mentioning blood and the lack of blood. And I was still very skeptical and still trying to give the police the benefit of the doubt. Well, maybe the blood isn't there. Maybe we're just not seeing it. And so it was pretty interesting to hear people's views once they started mentioning velocity, blood and where the blood should be. How come we're not seeing more blood? And I still went back and thought, well, maybe we're not seeing it maybe because it's on that blue blanket. Maybe because it's on the living room carpet. That carpet, I do believe the carpet is a little deceptive, and that there might be more blood on that carpet than we could see through those cameras. And the police obviously were not using the best cameras. I think that's clear too. But so that was the first thing, was to, I kept going back and saying, well, why are we having so many people, so many different people with so many different views on this case that are all saying that they don't think that the crime happened here? So what I wanted to do is just kind of document what the police were saying, why they think that the bodies were here, why they think that the whole crime happened here. They pretty much are saying that these 3 people were killed here, in this room, in this spot where the bodies were found. They do not mention that the bodies were ever moved, which leads me to think that the police think that how they found these bodies were how the bodies were found when they died. I guess maybe that's the wrong way to say, but the way that the bodies were found when the police saw them, according to what they're saying, they died right here in this spot. I don't see any evidence in their documents, in anything that they give us, where they are even open to the possibility that these three bodies might not have died where the bodies were found. And on the surface, that seems like, okay, that's possible, but when you start digging into it and start getting deeper into it, start looking at the recliner, item 34, and you can clearly see that somebody's blood is on item 34. Well, that's not anywhere near any of these three bodies. So that was the first thing that helped me understand that at some point, one of these bodies was actually moved. And of course, go ahead.
Then I think too, when we get into this discussion further, Catherine will be able to help us out. Greg, you and I have both, backgrounds with very limited with crime or crime scene investigation and backgrounds, whereas Catherine really is going to bring this to a whole new level. But we can point out at this juncture the anomalies already. The gun, even though it was mentioned to be listed on one instance fairly close to David's left hand, and in another instance about a foot away from David's left hand, the thing we have to keep in mind is that David was right-handed, never fired a gun with his left hand. So the question is not, was it wrong that it was 2 or 3 inches away and another detective said it was a foot away? The problem we have is, why was it next to his left hand? Now, it obviously couldn't have been near his right hand, because David's right hand was missing from the scene. There was no right hand. Comel had both of her hands missing. Left and right hands were missing from the scene. So they assumed, of course, by looking at that, to an elementary detective, a very beginner investigator would look at 3 bodies and say, yes, this is obviously where they were shot and killed. Obviously, the gun was right there. David did it. Done deal. But as we look further, as Catherine will get into here in a minute, the blood spatter that's on the scene, which is very limited, is all medium velocity. A handgun produces high velocity. A handgun produces blood spatter on the ceiling, on the walls, on the furniture, like in a mist form all over the place. We have some medium velocity on the hardwood floor, very little on the carpet, and the only spot, like Greg mentioned, that had huge amounts of blood actually got soaked in, a lot of that recliner cushion, is where no body was at all. So, Catherine, if you could start off with some of those things. I know Greg was alluding to a secondary crime scene. That's when a crime took place and a secondary crime scene was used. Now, we know the bodies, of course, were found here, but the evidence does not suggest that these 3 individuals were killed here, which means we have a secondary crime scene. And that's about all I'm going to give there for the lead in there, Catherine. But can you give us more of the details with your background and some of your folks that you talk to that are experts and professionals in this field?
Sure. I mean, you guys are both absolutely correct. The thing that I noticed with this sketch and this drawing, when you look at the number 1 and where they describe where the handgun was found, the several inches and then 1 of the foot, where you see where his left hand would be, it would be way up in the air. And the gun is nowhere near that hand. And, it would be way up there toward the top somewhere. But it is instead down by his hip and his waist. So that's way farther than a few inches to a foot from his hand. So we know that right away that their description of where the gun is found is incorrect, inaccurate. Something is, either what they state or the drawing. One of these 2 are absolutely incorrect. And also, you guys are right. When Camille had 2 gunshots to the head, that would have produced a lot of spray, a lot of high-velocity spray on the couch, especially if she were killed there. On that couch, on the floor, it would have been everywhere. On the ceiling, like you stated, they would have found her blood, I mean, it would be ridiculous what they would find. Same thing with Rania. She was laying, or so they say, either between this sketching shows her lying between her mother's legs, and then, of course, on the photo, it shows her lying on top of Kamel's left leg. And we know that, again, Rania did not fall naturally. These are not, generally speaking, natural positions where people would end up if they were shot. You don't usually end up on an arm like that with another above your head. You don't end up with, like David with his arms, one straight out, one up in the air. None of this scene makes sense. And so supposedly there are a total of 4 gunshot head wounds in this living room, yet there is 0 blood evidence to back up that theory. And, right away, you look at this and you start to read what they write and you're like, something's fishy. Why would they write this? And maybe they have an excuse, like Greg was saying, he wants to give them the benefit of the doubt. And that would be great. I would love to give them the benefit of the doubt, but yet they're remaining silent. Every time I try to reach out, they're quiet and they refuse to answer. So, it leaves us to only go with the evidence, and the evidence tells you a story far different than what is written in the conclusion that they came to.
I think one important thing here, just taking a few steps back, that I found interesting, point number 3 here, is that the gun was found cocked. Now, I don't know if maybe I'm reading too much into that, but I did make a note of that. I don't know if that's, again, if that's normal, if that's how we should expect to find this gun.
Well, and that's it, too, because I think he had a Glock, correct? I think, is the spring, I don't know much about handguns. I just know I find one and I shoot them at a range and I have fun. That's about all I know.
That's all you need to know, yeah.
But when I look at this handgun, it's not it would always be quote unquote cocked if you chamber a round. And from what I understand, there was a round in the chamber. So is that what they're talking about by being quote unquote cocked? But that's an automatic thing. As soon as you shoot, the next one comes up. You shoot, the next one comes up. So, again, like you said, why would they write that? It would be expected to find, something in the chamber, especially if there are extra bullets in the magazine. That's
Correct.
Just weird. I agree with you. It's weird.
Is that more, this is Dan, Greg, if you're talking about a revolver, it would need to be cocked or in a cocked position. This is a semi-automatic handgun with a magazine. And like Catherine says, once you fire that round, the next one automatically loads. Not to say it's cocked, though. Is that, once again, I don't have a background in this. Can Catherine expand a little more on that? Or why would they use that terminology, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. And like you said, and I like how you use the revolver. Take a revolver I have a 38 as well as a 9mm. My 38, on the very first one, you have to pull back that, I lost what it's called, the hammer. The hammer. You pull back that hammer, and then when you fire it, you don't have to keep pulling it back to continue shooting. So that would be, once you pull that thing back, whatever it's called, maybe it's not a hammer, I don't know, but you pull it back, that would be considered cocked.
Okay.
So, but on a gun like a 9mm and the Glock, same thing. When you pull that slide back, and it's called chambering around. So when you pull it back, a cartridge, a bullet, then comes up into the barrel. And then from that point on, you don't have to do anything other than shoot it. And once it's empty, then you put in a new magazine or refill it. So this is just, like you guys are saying, to word it this way, it's just weird.
Yeah. The other thing, I guess, getting back to the blood a little bit, that it was mostly on the ground. So, to me, that, again, somebody doesn't know anything about this, just looking as a complete outsider, I've never studied this stuff and never really looked into it. I'm trying to understand it, and that's another purpose of this book, is so that I can bounce these ideas, bounce these thoughts off of people who do, and try to learn more about what we are seeing here. But the fact that the blood was mostly on the ground, does that indicate that all three people were on the ground when shot?
It seems to me that that's what they are inferring, or implied. I'm sorry, that's called implied. They're implying that. Yet, again, the evidence doesn't support it. However, I want to jump to what you were saying about the rug, how the rug had different colors, and it did have some dark brown. And I could see where maybe when you first walk in, you would go, okay, it would be possible to hide some blood within that brown color on the rug. However, it's not all brown, and that blood would have gone everywhere, and yet you don't see the blood spatter patterns on that rug. And there would be a lot of brain matter, especially since Kamel was shot twice in the head. There should be brain matter all over that. Well, of course, then they're saying the dog ate it, but the dog couldn't go around eating all of it. They would find something, but they found nothing. They didn't even do the like a string. That you can follow blood spatter patterns by using strings, using lasers, or sometimes they use these sticks. I forget what the sticks are called at the moment, but they had a lot of options to figure out where these people were standing, what happened, but I don't see any of that, especially on this drawing. There's no mention of anything.
Yeah, it was implied that the bodies were almost shot execution style, as if the individuals shot them from above in a downward trajectory, causing the blood to be down there. That certainly could be what happened. Evidence doesn't support that, but we still have the David Crowley suicide shot, which was up into the ceiling, which means even if the other two were killed by someone pointing the gun down, allegedly David at them, would result in that blood on the floor. David's would be all over the ceiling. And like you said, Carmelo, I think, was actually shot. Evidence supports that she could have been shot 3 times. And so if they're all in the down position, I could see that the blood being down there on that floor, on that hardwood floor, it would make sense. But it doesn't explain David's. You find the gun in the left hand. He's right-handed. It's already cocked. He allegedly shot himself from a kneeling position or something, a sitting position, into the head. The bullet found in the attic after it goes through the sheetrock in the ceiling. And that bullet wasn't even there on January 17th when investigators completed the investigation. I think on the next day of this bullet was not found until February 18th, or that hole in the ceiling. So it's another month later. So we've got so many discrepancies here. But yes, it was it's very interesting. I think it does look like there was some blunt force trauma possibly in the area, because it does look like medium velocity versus a spray or a mist coming from a high velocity 40 caliber weapon.
Exactly.
And we haven't even brought up how loud that weapon is yet. So that's not for this chapter, but the neighbors there are very close proximity, and no one heard any of these alleged shots.
Correct. And two, to mention the blood, when you look at David in the photo, all of his blood it's like almost makes a perfect line down the center of his body on his left side. Now, he supposedly fell backwards, according to them and what they are implying. He shoots himself, falls backwards. Well, that doesn't explain the amount of blood on his shirt, and only on his left side. It would have been all over his back, or maybe some on his front, but not in the pattern that you see. And so, I'm just like, okay, nothing. You look at the photo and you're just left with, whoa, what really happened? And then when they start describing how they find things, and then they can't, the story or their writings and interpretations of what they are seeing, it comes close on most things, but on the important things like body position, weapon position, it's not agreed upon in people's reports. And that is another odd thing that I see.
Yeah, and one question that that I now have about the blunt force trauma is there any areas of blood, and I think we've talked about this, but I just want to clarify this. Are there any areas of blood that specifically show proof of blunt force trauma?
Yes.
Okay.
To the right of Kamel on the hardwood floor, and then when the blood spatter patterns on the wall behind them, like where the chair was, there's that wall behind them. There's a proof of blunt force or medium velocity blood spatter that hit that wall as well. So yes, there is that proof.
And what about the blood on the top of the recliner? There's actually hair and a little bit of flesh piece that are found there.
Yeah, that's weird. When I look at that part right there does remind me, and that is where I could see where maybe the dog had kind of maybe threw up or gagged and it got stuck there, or it could have also been flying off either during, a hit or a gunshot. Who knows? But again, there are a lot of what they call void patterns. So you have all of these massive injuries to the head, which is highly vascular. Lots of bleeding would be going on. Lots of blood would be showing, brain matter, bone. It would be everywhere. But we don't really see that. But we do see lots of areas where there's nothing, but then a medium velocity blood spatter pattern, which tells me that there was some type of, covering tarp. I don't know, but something was put in place that captured and caught a lot of the blood, because the patterns aren't making sense to the injuries and where the injuries are located.
So this is Dan. Catherine, what do you think the odds would be of this being the sole crime scene as opposed to a secondary crime scene, something being laid down, a mat, a canvas, a painting mat, or something that collected the gunshot blood, but was not there during the alleged beatings that obviously did take place there? Or do you think the blood that was there could have been staged to make it look like a beating? Or is that authentic blood from medium velocity beating?
Yeah, the blood patterns that I see look authentic, like it came from an actual injury, someone hitting somebody in the head, so to speak. I'm just throwing that out there as an example. However, I think both instances are correct. I agree with you, like you said at the beginning, that this is also like a secondary crime scene. I don't believe that they were all killed in that living room. There's just not enough proof. There is no blood that they showed from Rania or David in the living room, correct? It was all Kamel's. Am I wrong, or did I remember that incorrectly?
I think you're mostly right. There were some that were, we're not sure, right? It's like, it could be two or more, and we can't rule out Kamel or David, but yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, all that talk, and however, there was nothing that from any of the blood that they tested that stated, okay, this belonged to Rania, other than like on the knife or on the gun. I'm leaving those out. I'm talking, like the blood on the floor, the blood on the walls. They took one swab of the writing in the living room, but that's pretty much it. They, the rest of the blood did not seem to be tested. However, what was tested only belonged to Kamel. Now, so that tells us then where were Rania and David killed? Because if their blood isn't in that living room, they were killed somewhere else. Or it could be just the primary crime scene. Somebody put up a tarp and killed them all there, but the tarp or whatever that they used was not really sufficient, so things got through, and the people who did it just didn't care that someone was there. However, my best guess is I tend to agree with Dan that there at least one of them was not killed in that living room, and so it's like a primary for Kamel. I believe Kamel was killed in there, so primary for Kamel, but it could have been a secondary for David and or Rania. So I kind of think it's both, if that answers your question.
And so I got a quick comment here. It does, the evidence that we see, if you look at the facts, it suggests that Comel was beaten by blunt force trauma, blunt force instrument in that living room. May or may not have subsequently died or was shot at that point, but was beaten in that living room. That's what the evidence suggests. The problem is there is no baseball bat or tire iron or anything in that residence that shows proof that something was. So if this was done by a third party, they obviously took that weapon with them. Correct?
Correct. And if David had done it, it would have been sitting there. You know, they would have found it.
Well,
you know.
see, that's the point that we have an issue with. Is officially the official narrative is David did all the shooting. David killed his family and then killed himself. But if he beat someone, Kamel in this case, his wife, with a tire iron, baseball bat, or something, it would be in the residence. It's not, and that's just the facts.
Correct.
That's not a theory. It supports the fact that Kamel was beaten in that living room. May or may not have died there with gunshots, as we know, 3 of them. But there's no instrument that caused the beating. And the problem was there was a knife found at the scene, which we'll get into in the next paragraph or two. That seems to be an afterthought from the investigators.
Correct. And that bothers me as well, because when you have, you know, missing limbs, you don't just automatically jump to the dog did it. So they had a really good patsy to blame everything on, so they didn't really have to do the work. You know, but yes, that knife being there in the open position next to a body with all 3 of their blood on it, and they, like you said, it's to this day it's an afterthought. They never looked into that knife.
That's right. I think it should also be noted that we were talking about the bullet that was tied to David that didn't have blood on it. So I think it's safe to assume that they don't have any bullet that is tied to David. I mean, what are the odds that item 57 killed David and then there is no blood, but only DNA found on it?
It's impossible. It's totally impossible. So, you know, again, how the wounds were on David's head, they know that there's an exit wound on the left side of his head. So that the trajectory of what the bullet would take would not be to go from possibly right to left and then turn around and go east to west, south to west, or whatever. You know, that it would have to do a complete switch, turn around, and then shoot up into the ceiling. It's impossible. Absolutely impossible.
Let's see. The next thing I had here was how close would you have to be to get blood into the barrel of the gun? It was an interesting thing where we kind of found out that in the last podcast that, you know, there's no gunpowder or anything like that close to any of the 3 bodies. Am I correct in that? Right? There's no evidence that shows that any of these 3 were shot from close range.
On a few of them, I'm trying to remember who it was. There was no. There's no gunshot residue that they found. However, and what is in the barrel is called blowback. So in order to get that blowback into the barrel of the gun, they would have to be relatively close. So with it being that close, one would assume, especially with Kamel, with 2, at least, we know 2 gunshot wounds to her head, but like Dan said, there's a 3rd bullet fragment with her blood on it. So, you know, with the evidence, and we have to go with what only the evidence is showing us, is that she was shot twice. So there should be gunshot residue on her hair, on her clothes, and, you know, somewhere it should be there. But yet it's mighty convenient that it is missing throughout the entire house.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the things, too, we mentioned early on before we found out the the hands were missing was we asked about the gunshot residue. If David did this and shot himself, shot everyone else, the evidence would be on his right hand, gunshot residue that could be tested, showing that.
Mm.
And we don't have that because the gun was found next to his left hand. The only hand that was on the sitting adult. It's the left hand. It was sitting next to his left hand. But at this time now, his hand is all in a leathery, decomposing stage 3 weeks later. And so they were not able to test that. I don't believe it. Correct me if I'm wrong. But then you're talking a close-range gunshot, back of the head execution style. For instance, you would have that stippling, I think it's called, or the powder burns into the skin, showing that that gun was fired with 1 to 3, potential 1 to 3 inches away. But we don't really have that either because with the heads being missing. So we can't tell who was shot where or anything, much less. So we don't know if they were from a distance or from close range or not. So I think any kind of testing like that is also now inconclusive for the most part because we can't get that information.
Correct.
We literally can't get that information. And so that's where we're stuck too. But I was confused too, like Greg had pointed out, there was a bullet-like substance inside the barrel of the gun. And if that is common or not, as far as the blowback coming back in to the barrel itself, I find that strange.
Yeah, it's very common if the gun itself is held close to the body. But especially, like the head, you would expect to see blowback. So, yeah.
Okay, but there's no way. That's not out of the question. Okay. I got nothing else on page 35, but mentioning that, staying on the blood in the barrel, how does the blood get to the magazine? Now, that would definitely not be related to blowback or to anything like that, right? That's somebody reloading
right.
the gun with bloody hands.
Exactly, and that, right, I mean, again, it's like this scene, this evidence is giving them so much information. Someone was bleeding prior to that magazine being picked up. Whoever blood that was, they were bleeding prior to, obviously before they were shot. So this is, again, like you said, it does not go from shooting somebody to a thumbprint on a magazine.
Yeah, and the DNA profile, the blood that was found on the magazine did match David. Now, it said 2 or more DNA profiles were found on the magazine. The major DNA profile on the magazine matched David Crowley. An estimated 99.9997% of the general population was excluded from being possible contributors, but Kamel and Rania could not be excluded. So if Kamel's blood was everywhere, I had kind of thought that it would be an open and shut case, that it was Kamel's blood on that magazine, but it's not. It's David's blood.
So, okay, then that right there, oh my gosh, I mean, I've read that so many times, but it didn't click. But that right there tells you that David was bleeding prior to that gun being loaded. He was already injured. So what, do they want us to believe he went and hurt himself? He's bleeding, he's doing that, and he's going to load a magazine and then kill himself in his belly? None of that makes sense. That evidence right there shows that there had to have been someone else involved. And when you look at that print in that blood, it's a pretty good, clear print. You can clearly see ridges and valleys. And yet, from what I was reading, is that they were saying there wasn't enough ridge detail for them to determine whose thumbprint that was.
Correct.
And I don't know how they can do that, because there are ways that they can, recreate it, and that print looks pretty darn good. It's right in there. It's not smeared. Nothing. Clear as day. How come they couldn't, figure that out, whose it was?
Well, I think it would be good to compare that bloody print to the one bloody print that they could tie to David, which was on the note page found in the office bedroom. So that one, they were able to tie David's left middle finger to the notepad, but like you say here, we got a clear ridge detail. It looks, I mean, it looks like we could almost give that to someone and they might be able to figure something out. I don't know, but that's an interesting question. I'm going to have to look more into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to go back to the question once again. How many rounds did that magazine hold at
Right.
Yeah, it held 12. It held 12 rounds, but you know, when and I think mine holds something like that as well. But you know, I was always taught, you know, don't worry about that 12th round because you know it can get really hard and really tight to get that in there. But you know, this David's a young guy; he's probably pretty strong. So whether or not he loaded all of his magazines with 12 rounds is to be questioned. But when you look at the other magazine that was in the safe, that one only had 11 rounds in it. So it just kind of makes me think that he didn't put that 12th one in just because it makes it harder. So you don't waste your time. If you're going to go fast, you know, you don't want to waste your time trying to shove in that last one. You just load what you're going to do. And this is just, I'm talking practice-wise. You load it, and then you shoot it, empty, you load it. And it's either 11 or 12, but my best guess would be 11. And in that case, it seems like you can count and account for all of the projectiles. But I could be wrong. Don't take my word for that.
Here's a good point, Catherine. For the sake of argument, let's say he had 10 in there. Whether it held 12 or had 2 in the chamber, he only fired allegedly 60 shots that day. Why was David reloading anything? The next question is, why was David bleeding at all? Is the question.
Correct.
He allegedly shot his daughter, his wife, and himself. None of those situations involved him bleeding. So now we get back into this torture or a beating situation. Who was beating David, or what took place that caused David Crowley to be bleeding in the first place? Not even yet to ask the question, why the hell was he changing cartridges, magazines? He had no reason to even swap it out. So why was that thing even out, much less why was his blood on it? So what we get here is more and more evidence of a staging that took place, where errors were made. Correct?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Just going back to the gun, unless you have anything else on that.
No, go ahead, Greg.
Just going back to the gun, the presence of blood was found on the grip, on the slide, on the trigger, and the muzzle of the gun. Item 1B is the magazine inside of the alleged murder weapon. Ridge detail blood was found on the magazine. Several blood mixtures were found on the gun, specifically on the trigger and the magazine. Now, DNA results show blood from 2 or more individuals on the trigger, with one of those individuals being David Crowley. So that led me to think, well, yeah, of course, David Crowley is shooting people. He's shooting himself. His blood should be there, right?
Correct.
But with the magazine, with the blood being found, his blood inside of the magazine, and there are several blood spots, too. There isn't just one on the magazine. So that was another interesting thing, too. But it's important to note, just looking at the DNA results that show blood of 2 or more individuals on the trigger, that the blood did not match Kamel, but Rania could not be excluded as a possible contributor. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And on the trigger, it's like, but where on that trigger? Because if David had shot himself, his finger would have been on that trigger protecting it, so to speak. It's, you know, it's there, you pull it, and then it goes off. So his blood, how did it get there? And was there a print on it? You know, what did it look like? I mean, I have so many questions about this, and yet I can't find the answers in any of the reports. Because if it's on that trigger where your finger would be, that means that someone else had to have had their finger on that trigger with David's blood on their hand. Because David would not have, again, why would he have blood on his hands and then pull a trigger? It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
Well, the only thing there, Catherine, is that whether or not he was bleeding, which we have evidence that he was, the other question is, David in this situation may have had other people's blood on his hands. For instance, the blood writing on the wall, that was Kamel's blood that was written Allahu Akbar in capital letters in the living room wall. So he did have blood on his person. It just wasn't his own. But at one point, he did. He was bleeding. So he did have other folks' blood was around, correct? Now, he had other people's blood potentially on him, according to the official narrative, I'll say.
Yeah, that I haven't read yet, so I guess I need to go back and read more on that. But, I mean, what they are assuming is that, David did write on the wall. However, since they could find no discernible ridge detail on any of the writing, that means that there was a glove or something on that hand, because there should be ridge detail, especially where the hands first touch and then slide down. But when you're looking at, the writing on that wall and how the fingers are, they don't look like the fingers of a hand that is attached to a body. Because that index finger is kind of wobbly and it's all over the place in some parts. And then other parts, they're like close together. So it's, again,
and sorry, I didn't mean to assume that David did it. I meant according to the narrative. So they're investigating that he did all this, but yet we do know that David did not write anything, in fact, on the wall with a glove or not. It was nothing tied him to the writing on that wall. So yet the latex glove or something was used by the person or individual doing that writing on the wall.
Correct. And I didn't even think that you were inferring or implying, I'm sorry, that David did it. I didn't take that at all. I got exactly what you were saying, because it's like, he obviously was bleeding, and so how did the blood get there, and why is he bleeding? And that's kind of my question, too. It's like, why is he bleeding prior to picking anything up? If, they're trying to say he did it and he picked this up and loaded that, well, why was he bleeding? And they don't answer that question.
Yeah, there's 2 points that I mentioned to people that follow the case and just kind of want to put a summary of it, believe it or not. I tell them there's 2 things. There's 2 instances where one is where there is blood of David where there shouldn't be. That's the magazine. David shouldn't have been bleeding at all if he killed himself. And there's no blood where there should have been blood. The bullet that killed him, not a single drop of blood, not a microscopic piece of blood was on that bullet fragment. And so that's all I think that folks need to know to put 2 and 2 together on this case. 2 things that are almost physically impossible, that are, for the most part, physically impossible. That's all that the elementary user following a case like this needs to know. Then you get into the rest, and Greg has done a great job putting all this together in the 16 chapters of the book, is outlining all of the various dozens of inconsistencies. And so what we have here is a very troubling case when it's all said and done.
Yep. Agreed.
So the only other thing on the magazine is that there was 1 round found in the chamber of the gun, and there were 2 unspent rounds found in the magazine. Latent prints were not found on these 3. So that was the other question. I guess, whoever loaded this gun, wouldn't there be something? Wouldn't there be DNA? Okay, maybe not latent prints, but wouldn't there be David's DNA on these unspent rounds?
Yeah, there should be prints, and smudged, they would be smeared, but there would be prints and there would be DNA, there would be something on those, because you have to pick them up, put them in there, and then shove them in. Pick them up, put them in, and shove them in. So they should have found something. If it was David, because David wouldn't go around going, okay, I'm going to clean this and put it in with a hanky or something. You just pick those things up and shove them in.
Yeah, and I would have to go back to see if they looked for the latent prints and didn't find them, or if they just didn't even bother to look for it. I guess I wasn't clear on that.
Yeah.
Based on what they did. Only other thing, maybe, well, no, there's a few more things here, but with the gun and the magazine, it's also stated that there were hairs and fibers found, and so that was another weird thing. Made me wonder, well, okay, how do hair and fibers get there, and could the blunt force trauma be associated with the gun hitting someone's head? Maybe it's not that deep, but obviously the hairs and the fibers got there on the gun and the magazine somehow.
Yeah, I did talk to my coroner friend about that, and they stated that the impressions on the skull piece on the floor do not match that of the butt of a gun. So they said they do not believe that was used to beat at least David. We don't know about Kamel. So and then yeah, it's like the hair and the fibers. I mean, obviously, again, whoever picked it up had blood and had that person's hair, and then they transferred it to the hand. You know, the hand. I'm sorry, I can't think. I'm just so tired. But okay, where the hands are.
So the question is, blunt force trauma is a very violent act, and I like to use examples of a tire iron or a baseball bat where someone's winding up and swinging with full force, full velocity. Now, do you mean with the evidence on that gun, like as if someone was, for instance, pistol whipped or something like that? That's not tied. Wouldn't relate to blunt force trauma to that extent, as far as the seriousness of the indentations we found on those bone fragments that were hexagon in shape. So I don't think that was the case, but are you alluding to maybe that one or some of these victims were maybe just pistol whipped a little bit as far as the beating?
Yeah, I would think so. Maybe they were pistol whipped, or I mean, that's the only thing to me, because if you look at the back of the gun, it kind of does look like that. The back of the grip of the gun, it kind of looks like maybe somebody was hit over the head with it. Now, yeah, I don't want to say that it's tied to the blunt force trauma. I think you guys have made some great points there about, obviously a gun in general being pistol whipped is not going to be categorized as blunt force trauma. Is that correct?
Oh, it would. It would.
Yeah,
if they found proof, blunt force trauma is pretty much anything other than, it's running into a wall would be blunt force trauma. Falling down on the ground, and if you bust your head open, it becomes blunt force trauma. So it's just, injuries basically to the body.
I see.
And I think just to clarify that is the pistol whipping, for instance, if that was and if that did come into play, I don't think it played a major factor, if at all, in this particular case. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This was a violent. The impressions left on someone's skull are violent, violent attack, not just a backhanded swing with a pistol in your hand. Which I don't want to rule that out, but I don't think it came into play with the blood coming out, the spray, or the damage to bones from that. Although it could have been
correct.
Pistol whip could have been involved, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and maybe it was that they don't write, and nothing tells us that, but it's easy to transfer blood and hair to the grip of the gun if you have blood and hair on your hands. But like you were saying, Dan, this was very violent, and it was very personal. So, yeah, that's what I'll have to say with that.
Now, should we move on to the knife?
Oh, that knife. Oh.
So it did look like the knife was open and in the locked position. There was blood, and there was human blood on it, which means someone was being cut or tortured or sliced up. Who knows what was taking place? But it did look like his was cleaned or cleaned off or wiped. But there's a little hole on the blade that wasn't. So someone once again missed that, and when they swapped it, it did come back with blood. So what role did this knife play in this event? Thoughts, Captain?
Yes, this is the thing where I wrote one of the officers, or maybe it was the chief, and I'm like, it's the only piece of evidence that they had that contained the DNA and or blood of all three victims. And that should have been playing a major role. They should have looked more into this knife, but they just discarded it, pushed it to the side. Let's note it because it's there, and then we're just going to ignore it. This knife really, I see it as a major key piece of evidence. And why didn't it go further? That is, I would just love to have that answer. When you know, again, it has the DNA and the blood of all three, and all three are missing limbs. So, and they're showing, evidence of, something with a straight edge being applied to their body. So why didn't they look into it? I'm just like, this frustrates me. The knife frustrates me.
Well, I think here in the closing minutes, the one thing, Catherine, is that I do believe it held all of that information. The DNA, it should have been explored further and really delved into, but because it didn't fit the narrative, I think they had to move on, and like I mentioned earlier, it was basically treated as an afterthought in the police report. It was just there, but in a normal case, a knife, holding knife with a locking blade with blood on it, it's going to raise some suspicions in any case. And here it was just mentioned in a paragraph or two, and then it was moved on. So I think they eliminated it because it didn't fit the official narrative of David shooting everybody, because now you have to explain why a knife was used and why a knife in that room had all three of their blood on it, and it was wiped and cleaned off. If David is going around killing people and knifing people, would he take the time to wipe that down? That's the question. So once again, we've got errors in the staging of this scene. And to say, the missing body parts, we've got 3 adult hands missing. Now, I'm not sure about this myself, but could a knife have aided or assisted in that? Probably, more than likely. But I don't think actually finishing the job with those ligaments and tendons and whatnot. And then you've got a 5-year-old girl's arm completely missing. That would include the shoulder socket, ligaments, those strong muscle pieces that I don't know if a common knife would have done those things. So we've got some serious questions here as far as what role did that knife play. It obviously played some role, but it couldn't have done the damage that has been accounted for. And I think that's where we see that broken, fractured rib of the 5-year-old girl, that third rib down on her right side, just under that armpit of hers, where the arm was missing, alludes or allows someone to say that evidence does suggest that that arm was ripped off by a human with his foot lodged in there for leverage.
Correct. That's exactly what the evidence is saying to me. I totally agree with you.
Yep, and the sad thing with all this is these individuals are out on the loose and walking about freely in public today, and that's what I don't think folks understand from a big picture perspective.
Yep.
This is Stephanie. I just wanted to say I have been going over all that paperwork. I printed it all out, and I am so glad you guys brought up how weird it was that the knife was just pushed aside, because that is just right there one of the biggest pieces of evidence in this case, yet they dismissed it completely, it seems.
Yeah, it's like they didn't even want to talk about it. The knife is not mentioned. It's not credited with anything. I think if people would have known that from the very start, that there was a knife there, I think it might have raised more questions.
Yes.
Definitely.
And then, as Dan was saying, these people are just out there, and online, there alone is so much evidence of them making these sick jokes about, oh yes, we did this and we mixed the blood with water. And why would anyone, if they truly believe David was guilty, why would they ever say something like that? that's horrible. You know, if they really cared about that family and their extended family, why would they put that out on a public forum for anybody in the world to see?
Yeah, that was absolutely horrible and tasteless. I'm glad you finally joined. I'm sorry that I probably took up a lot of the time, and thank you for being here, Stefanie. I really, really appreciate when you're here. But I got to hit the road here, so I'm going to jump off. But thank you, everybody, and we will, next one,
Oh, yeah. We'll
cover
get back.
more of this.
Yeah.
It will be
Yeah, I was a little late today.
That's okay.
Welcome, Stephanie. Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
But yes,
Thanks
the
for
last
joining
thing
us.
I've got to say before I got to jump off as well is does the limitations of that reference to that knife prove a law enforcement cover-up? I don't think that it really does, but there may have been pages upon pages written about that. And the question is, when the final report was written, all we get is a paragraph, was that eliminated? Was that redacted? Was that stripped?
Yes.
You know, I'm not
because there was.
They did their homework on it, but why did it not make the final report? And there, I think, is where you start to see a little bit of the underpinnings of a cover-up involved in this entire escapade.
Yes.
Completely agree.
Yes, especially with all the current stuff going on over there.
Yeah, the knife is really out of place.
I got to jump off as well. Thanks
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you, Dan and Catherine. Appreciate that.
Thank you, guys. It's so nice to hear you.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for joining, Stefanie. Thanks, Greg. Bye, Dan.
Bye, guys. Stefanie, go ahead and stay on if you want here. I think we should cover a little bit more about this knife and kind of explain, because I think a lot of people just have not heard about this. They just simply don't know. This knife was found closest to David's left leg, similar to where the gun was found, closer to David's left leg. And obviously, he's not going to put both of those there. There's no reason for the knife to be found. There's no reason for a knife there, first of all. Second of all, it's so out of place. But the fact that, you know, the knife, which is item 8, is found very close to item 1, you now have two possible murder weapons, possibly.
Right.
But so when they looked at the blood on this knife, the blood came from a mixture of 2 or more people, according to the DNA results. David, Kamel, and Rania cannot be excluded from being possible contributors of the mixture, but 99.9998% of the general population could be. So they're saying that the blood had to have come from them, from 2 or more people. That's pretty interesting, and it's pretty interesting how little, again, that the knife is actually mentioned. Item 8.1 is the blood swab inside of the hole of the blade. Item 8-2 is a swab of blood found on the folding side of the blade, and blood is not present on the handle of the knife, which I also found very interesting, that the blood was not present on the handle, which kind of makes no sense. You would expect that
If David had shot them and removed her hands, which is the only way I can possibly come up with how they came off, he would have had blood on his hands. And touching that knife, there should have been blood all over it. There was, I think there was hair found on it too.
Yes, yeah. Item 8-4 is a hair sample found on the handle. So there's no blood on the handle, but there is a hair sample. We don't know whose hair sample that is. It's never explained or never, they don't go, there's no hair test done, period, that I've found to explain whose hair, because there's hair everywhere. And not one
it's not
test.
just like fake hair, or excuse me, it's not just like human hair, it's also synthetic hair from that stuffed animal.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of that all over, and there's like cotton fibers that I guess came from the animal, the stuffed animal as well, and that's all just like mixed in everywhere. And that I believe is from paleo, You know,
yeah.
it's completely possible that he just,
And there's
him
there's
being
also
alive
dog hair.
really just, yeah, and there's dog hair too. Him being alive, he was able to take every single piece of evidence and move it around, except the things that was blamed on him, that the things that he was accused of doing don't make sense. Like this knife. It should have David's fingerprints.
It should have.
Right on there, if he's the one who had it. Now, if someone who had gloves on was touching it, I still don't understand how there wasn't blood on the handle, but it wouldn't leave fingerprints if you had gloves on.
Right.
And it's completely, when you're looking at where the knife was found and where the gun was found, it really just looks like somebody tossed them there, to me, at least.
So I'm zooming in on item 8 here for the viewers that will see this later, and then where item 1 is, and you can clearly see, they're both next to,
right there.
It's so out of place. It's just so weird. I don't know. I mean, even if somebody was staging this scene, it still seems like why is this knife here? Why is this knife left there? It just leads to so many different, so many rabbit holes, I guess is the easiest way to say it. But
what you end up doing in looking at this case is trying your hardest to come up with every possible solution, even going down the route that he is guilty, and doing this, you're looking at this crime scene and the pictures, and it's like, okay, why is that there? Why are those two right there? Looking at the difference in the reports between each officer, between even the slightest little differences, that could just be coincidence, but all of these rabbit holes end up leading you down the even bigger assumption that there's a giant cover-up here. And I really, really hate saying that because I don't agree with a lot of conspiracy theories, but there's a lot of truth in these so-called crazy people that just, they've lost their minds and they're just believing these things for no reason. There's a lot of truth in it. Like the Philip Marshall, that case, there's quite a few holes there.
There are.
There was, the name escapes me right now. I just started looking into this woman who, in Minnesota, oddly enough, not by Apple Valley, but around, I don't even remember the county, but it's in Minnesota. She supposedly killed herself and her son, and the ex-husband is nowhere to be found. And there's just a lot of holes in it. It doesn't make sense. But it's been looked at as a suicide. And, I mean, it's possible. But there are things like with this case where there's things there that shouldn't be there. If David used his hands to write in Kamel's blood on the wall, there should be his fingerprints on that wall. All over the place. I mean, Kamel, and Ranny were the only ones in that house. Everyone can attest to that. Everybody in the family, the friends, can attest to, oh yeah, they secluded themselves. They stayed secluded, which means there shouldn't be any other DNA samples, hair samples, fingerprints, nothing in that house.
Right.
You can tell that they cleaned because, I mean, even with one dog and two adults and a child, if they didn't clean, that place would be a wreck. So they cleaned.
Yeah, and
there's
they got there was a lot of questions about that, about how the house looked, and some of the comments that I've seen, oh, the house looks dirty and this and that. But well, we also
there's
have
a point to where it stops though. Like on certain spaces where you'd expect there to be continued dust, there's a clean spot, or in some of the pictures in the living room of the floor where you can see like blood spatter and hair, there's almost a clear line in several of the pictures of where it just looks like somebody cleaned up to that point or picked something up. And I don't know. I'm not quite to the point where I understand completely how all this happened, but it's just odd. Even the smallest things, like there not being blood on this handle. Why? Why isn't it there? And as a good investigator, if they are doing their job the correct way, following what they're supposed to do, why didn't that bother them? And if it did, why aren't there notes on how much it bothered them?
I always wondered why, with the knife open, because at first I didn't know that the knife was actually open, and I didn't know that it had blood on it. So I learned that much later. But just looking at the knife, I was like, well, why is there a knife there? It's not really mentioned. And then, well, once I found that the knife was open, then it was like, wait a minute, that's a clear sign that there is possible, quote unquote, a possible sign of a struggle. That's one of the biggest, clearest signs, and it's not like it's in some other room. It's in the living room. It's right there where these bodies are found.
Right
How
by
is
the
that
gun.
not right by
next
the gun?
To David,
right next to David. Right.
And
not
it's weird.
Not next to Kamel. Not really. There's no way that
not
it was
somewhere
next
else.
to her. No, it
like
is right by David. Yeah.
Like almost like they were specifically trying to say, hey, he did it, because they didn't leave it on the right-hand side of him where his hand was missing. Right. They specifically left the gun, item 1, and this knife, item 8.
Item 8, yes. Very,
on
very
David's
close
left side.
Right. That's
so
all.
He wasn't left-handed.
Exactly, and they knew that. I mean, it didn't take them long to figure that out. Even when we asked Detective Gummert, do you think David shot with the right, or do you think he was right-handed or left-handed? It was pretty simple. They knew that he was right-handed. There was no indication at any time that he was ever left-handed. So there, right there, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Now, I do want to wrap this up. I do want to get your final thoughts here. I want to finish up just a little bit on the latent prints that were found on the gun, because there were some that were found there. And there was latent print found on the magazine. So the latent prints, and I'm reading from page 36 of the physical book, and I don't know exactly what page it is for the digital version. I apologize for that. But latent print results revolved around 2 of 3 latent prints suitable for comparison. 1 found on the gun and 1 found on the magazine. Now, LP1A-1 is a latent palm print on the gun. According to the latent print results, no known palm print for David Timothy Crowley was submitted or found in the BCA files for comparison to the palm print on that gun. So that just proves they could not put any palm prints, any prints of David on that gun. Yeah, they had David's blood. David's blood was on that gun. It was also inside of the magazine of that gun, which, like how we talked about before you joined our call, we had talked about, how did David's blood get on the magazine? He must have been bleeding. So obviously,
But did he take it out to reload or something?
We don't know. We don't know. But again, it's like, well, how did his blood get there? If he took it out to reload, how was he wounded? Who wounded him first? That's another great question there. So that we know that there was a bloody print found on the gun, on the handle of the gun. but they could not tie that to David. Now, LP1B-2 is a latent fingerprint found on the magazine. However, this too cannot be tied to David due to the limited quantity and quality of information in the latent print. So, nothing. Nothing there. Nothing that shows that David Crowley did any of this. Now, she also says, here we go, Jennifer Kostrowski consulted with Dennis Randall. These are from the BCA, I believe, about this latent print. He agreed that it could be one or two prints. And that was another thing. There could be multiple prints on that gun. And they say, which was unusual. Coupled with low quality makes it difficult to determine. So here we have the first and the last place that I've ever found that there were two prints here. Now, that doesn't mean, first of all, well, two prints by two different people or what? We don't really know, because what we know is if they could not tie that print to David Crowley, then it's possible, not saying that it's true, but it's possible, maybe not probable, but it's possible that there were one or two other prints by one or two other people on that gun. Or maybe it's David's and they just couldn't conclusively say that it was his, but there were multiple prints on that gun. So I don't.
Yeah, I thought maybe it could have been Kamel's, because it was her fingerprints on the gun safe, the touchpad thing.
I think it was her DNA.
I thought maybe.
Right?
Oh, was it her DNA?
Yeah, I think it was her DNA, not her prints. I know that there wasn't blood found on it. I think it was
like
her
just
DNA.
A nuclear DNA swab.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
Right.
But so I thought maybe it could have been hers, but if you go through the reports and look up with the item number and everything, it doesn't say whose it, like they just couldn't figure out whose it was.
Yeah.
And
basically.
that I don't.
And somehow this is all supposed to show, well, it's nobody. We couldn't find anybody else. It all goes back to their theory. They couldn't find anybody else, so it must be David. But yet here we have all this proof that it wasn't David. It wasn't him.
Yes.
It's somebody else.
If this was just like the process of elimination, well, okay, it was just these three in the house. Gun's here, knives here. He must have done it.
Right. Without any of it. Yeah.
That's something that a normal person who doesn't have any detective, police, forensic, medical, anything like that, someone who just, is, I don't know even what type of person that is nowadays, but even somebody who's interested in watching the CSI or NCIS or, just true crime shows would look at that and go, okay, well, if it's him, then his prints are going to be here, here, and here.
Right.
So then you go to that, but his fingerprints aren't there. You've got unknown DNA samples that didn't belong to Kamel, David, or Rania.
Mm-hmm.
So why didn't they follow that? Why didn't they find out whose it was? They had enough to sample to find out it wasn't those three, so was the whole sample destroyed in doing that, so they couldn't run it in any of their systems? Right. I'm really confused by this, because especially in this day and age, we are able to literally track people because they're carrying a GPS device on their person.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cell phone. But we still have cases like this that the police closed and said it was. They are confident that David was the perpetrator of this crime. So why are there unanswered questions?
There shouldn't be.
If you close a case, there should never be any unanswered questions, because those detectives aren't supposed to close a case until they run down every little rabbit hole. When they open up a hotline or a tip line to call in,
mm-hmm.
they have to run down every single lead, even if it's a fake. So why didn't they do that here?
Right.
Why was this case closed if there are so many unanswered questions? And why aren't the detectives willing to talk about it? Why aren't the detectives willing to explain their thinking in this, you know?
That's right. And I want to get your final thoughts here. I want to shut this one down. We're going to come back. This was podcast number 6. We're going to come back for number 7, and we're going to talk about the bullet casings and the bullets, and we're going to see if they line up, if they all match, right? They find these many casings, and they should find these many bullets on the same day, not days later, not months later. But let me get any final thoughts here before we close out this episode.
I'm wondering if, given the current stuff going on in Minnesota, if maybe this case is going to get some investigation by someone. I don't know who at this point would, but someone needs to re-look into this case, because if you've got a few thousand people who don't have any detective or police background finding all these inconsistencies, why weren't the police able to do it?
Correct. That's a great question.
They said he just snapped. He had PTSD and he just snapped. These things on the wall, everything at the crime scene, that was just his parting shot to his wife. Yet she was his world. Kamel and Ranny was his whole world. Like, if you look back through his, well, I don't know how much you can look up now, but if you just search through and find David, like the stuff actually written by David or the videos done by him, you can see how much he loved them. And it doesn't make sense how he could have just snapped and out of nowhere done this very heinous, hurtful thing. Because if someone does snap, there is a history of it.
Right.
Whether or not anybody wants to believe that, if David had some kind of PTSD stuff, Kamel would have written it. Kamel would have written about it. Everything I've seen and read about her, she seems like a very, very intelligent woman. I don't see how she didn't write something somewhere, you know, but that could also, maybe that's something else that's not been shown to the public.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we touch a little bit on that in the book later on when we talk about the guy named Mitch Heil, who served with David Crowley, who was his friend, that has made it very, very clear that David did not have PTSD. So I'm going to go with that, and I'm going to, take that. I'm going to weigh what Mitch Heil says compared to what everybody else is saying. Nobody was saying David had PTSD while they were working with him, while they were making money with him, while they were making, while they were riding the coattails of David Crowley. Nobody had any problem with David having PTSD. But as soon as he dies, it becomes a convenient excuse, which I don't like, because there are real people, real soldiers out there who do have that. And not just soldiers, but we're just talking about soldiers here.
Well, especially in the military, it is looked down upon for them to go and get counseling.
Oh, yeah.
Just like if you were in a mental hospital, you wouldn't go to your job interview and go, oh, by the way, I was in a mental hospital, just so you know.
Good point.
That's not something you would ever disclose unless you absolutely had to, like in a personal relationship or, doctor to doctor, something like that.
Good point.
David, with Mitch Heil knowing David as long as he had, you would think that he would have been the first person, him or Danny or Dan Sr., one of them.
That's true.
Would have said, or even Allison. one of them would have said, no, we know he did this because he's struggled with this for a long time. None of them had any inkling of that. None of them said a word about it. With this whole Gray State movie, while it was, stars and dollar signs in everybody's eyes, David was a great guy and everybody believed in him and everybody was behind him. And then after this happens, the people that David was distancing himself from changed their ideology from always ask questions, always look deeper, never stop till you're satisfied, to stop, don't go there, trust us, we know what's going on, you don't need to look further into this. That's weird. That in itself is weird. You don't act like that if you don't have something to hide.
Well said. Well said, my friend. I think that's a great...
appreciate you having me call, even though I was quite late.
That's okay. I think you're our good closer here. You usually close out the show with some great thoughts here. I think that's a great place for us to shut this one down, and we'll come back, and I hope you join us for number 7. We're going to be talking about the bullets and the bullet casings, and we're going to make sure that everything turned out correctly. So if you've read my book, you will know we're still on the living room chapter. We only got through about a couple pages here, but we will come back next month. And thank you, Stefanie, again for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Until next time, God bless you all, and we will be back here next month.